Shalom, shalom, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this first in five-part series. We're so glad you can join us for this and for as much of this as you can join as possible. If you miss one, let us know. We'll send you the recording. But we're so glad you're here for this exciting program with really a great scholar. Dr. Eitan Fishbane is professor of Jewish thought at the Jewish Theological Seminary, JTS, where he's taught for 17 years. A 2015 to 2016 JTS Chancellor's Fellow, Fishbane has served on the JTS Faculty Executive Committee as BA and MA Advisor in Jewish Thought and on the Rabbinical School Council. He's a former Division Chair for Jewish Mysticism at the Association for Jewish Studies, AJS, current Chair of the Oxford Interfaith Forum on Mysticism, and Book Review Editor for Jewish Mysticism at Marginalia Review of Books. He's the recipient of grants from the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture and the National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH, as well as the Charles A. Riskop Fellowship from the American Council of Learned Societies, ACLS. Among Professor Fishbane's published books are The Art of Mystical Narrative, A Poetics of the Zohar, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. As Light Before Dawn, The Inner World of a Medieval Kabbalist, published by Stanford University Press in 2018. In 2009, and most recently, Embers of Pilgrimage, Panui Poetry Series in 2021. He's currently at work on several book projects, among them Shabbat and Hasidic Thought, Sacred Time and Mystical Consciousness, Self and Identity in 16th-Century Kabbalah, our topic today, and the Zohar as mystical poetry. In addition to these academic projects, Fishbane is working on a spiritual theological commentary on the Torah cycle and the Jewish holidays, tentatively entitled Written on the Heart, Meditations and Readings, and he's completing his second volume of original poetry entitled Soul Fragments. Fishbane received his PhD and BA summa cum laude from Brandeis University, and you can visit him at www.eitanfishbane.com, and we'll put that in the chat here as well. We've had Professor Eitan Fishbane here at VBM in the past, and we're thrilled to have him back again. He's just a delightful teacher, profound scholar, and a real mensch. So, self and mystical identity in 16th century Kabbalah. Eitan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rav Shmuley, I'm really honored to teach for VBM for Valley Beit Midrash, and really admire all of the amazing work that you and your colleagues do in all the different ways. So. Shikoch to you and your team, and I'm really it's really special to study with all of you, especially in this very difficult time that we're living through, and so I hope some of our study can raise up some of our spirits, some of our sparks, some of the fallen sparks, and be dedicated to our yearning for shalom. So this is a special special for me to teach this particular series, also because this is related, as Rav Shmuley mentioned, very much to a book project that has been percolating somewhere inside me for many years, and has come out in the form of a few different essays that have already been published, some that are forthcoming, some that have still to go from Atzilut to all the way to Asiyah and the four worlds evolution. But it's ultimately going to be a fuller length, a longer book project that'll come out in some number of years. So it's a great pleasure to think through some of these ideas with you, and hopefully some of the texts and ideas will be of spiritual and moral meaning and personal meaning to you in your study, in your Jewish study. So the topic for our first session really is kind of the grounding question you might say the grounding thesis of what will be that book, and it revolves around the question of what is personhood, what is selfhood, what is the essence of a person according to Kabbalistic thought, mystical thought, and particularly the Kabbalists of 16th century Tzfat. So just a word about 16th century Tzfat, since it's such a was such an important place of renaissance and rebirth and creativity in the history of Jewish spirituality and civilization, and is the grounding for the text that we're going to be studying. Really, in the wake of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and then Portugal in 1492 and 1496, there were many Jews who found refuge in the Ottoman Empire, among other places, and a good many of them eventually made their way to the land of Israel, which was then under the Ottoman Empire control, and a center of mysticism and of Kabbalah, and Kabbalah really stretching back all the way in its literary form all the way to late 12th century Provence and flourishing in 13th and 14th century Spain. And there's tons more to talk about there, but in the decades following the expulsion of the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, there developed this community of either direct refugees or, in many cases, descendants of those refugees. For example, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who will play one of the starring roles in the book, which has yet to be optioned for its movie rights. All right, so we'll see how that goes. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, he's of great halachic fame, of course, the author of the Shulchan Aruch and more, and even more elaborately, the Beit Yosef, major halachic works, major Jewish legal works that still have an influence today. And he was 4 years old when at the expulsion from Spain. And he's one of the figures that we're going to come back to, especially when we talk about mystical autobiography a little bit later in the series, which is another important piece of the puzzle. But really, in the mid 1500s, in the 16th century, there developed this amazing group of mystics, of poets, of philosophers, of halachists, Talmudists, of ethicists and moralists, and oftentimes these different characterizations very much overlapped. And it was a flourishing community in that respect, right? It's in 16th century Tzfat that Yedid Nefesh was born and was written, and that Lekha Dodi was written, among many other famous things. That the Kabbalah Shabbat service, as we know it, was invented in 16th century Kabbalah. That Tikkun Leil Shavuot was invented as a ritual in 16th in this time and place. That the Tu B'Shvat Seder and on and on. So there was enormous impact on a whole variety of levels in the history of Jewish ritual and thought. Most famously, in the 16th century, in this context, what was the influence of the Ari, Isaac Luria, who had a huge formative impact on Kabbalah then and afterwards. And we're going to be looking at some passages by Chaim Vital, who was one of the main disciples and perhaps the main scribe of Rabbi Isaac Luria, who taught most of his teachings orally and wrote very little. There also were many other major figures who we will touch on in the course of the series, including, as I mentioned, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who not only wrote great halachic works but also spent his midnights being possessed by in a very positive sense, as he would have it, by the angel of the Mishnah, perhaps even the Shekhinah herself. It's speculated in his, and as he records in his mystical diary, Magid Mesharim, which we'll talk about in some subsequent sessions, including the figure Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the Ramak, who was really the Thomas Aquinas, you might say, of 16th century Kabbalah, who wrote massive systematic works on abstract metaphysical ideas in Kabbalah, but also wrote an amazing short and direct mystical ethical manual called Tomer Devorah, the Palm Tree of Deborah, which had an enormous impact on the formation of Jewish ethics and Musar, and other figures like Elazar Azikri who is the author of Yedid Nefesh, and Shlomo Alkabetz, who is the author of Lekha Dodi, and then a whole range of other thinkers. So Bekitsur, as they say, or in short, 16th century Tzfat was this amazing period in the history of Jewish spirituality and mysticism, and in the history of Jewish civilization in terms of creativity. Solomon Schechter, blessed memory, wrote a very important essay about this group and this time and place more than 100 years ago, and there's been a lot more that's been written about it as well. But what I wanted to talk about today, and this will relate to our specific text that we're going to look at, is the very question of how did mystics of this period, specifically in the tradition of Luria, specifically Chaim Vital, both in one of his works, Sha'arei Kedusha, Gates of Holiness, which was a kind of both a mystical theological work and also a moralistic work and pietistic work, and also in his work Shar HaGilgulim, the Gate of Reincarnations, which is a very, very important text, which we will also touch on in our text and in our further discussion. It's perhaps less known that Judaism, particularly in the form of Kabbalah, had a major place, not only a major soft spot, but it was understood to be very central. The question of soul reincarnation, right? This was not just something from the Far East, as is sometimes assumed, but it's something that is found in a whole variety of different cultures, ranging from Amerindian culture in North America to ancient Greece, to India, and elsewhere in the Far East, to Kabbalah, and so on. But at the core, or at the foundation of this interest, this core focus on the idea of reincarnation and what it means also for the human being's struggle with life and death, with the question of what are the borders of mortality and finitude and infinitude, right? We can see reverberations of Jungian archetypes of the universal, if we can say that all human beings at one level or another struggle with the question of what are the boundaries of my life and my loved one's life, and is the soul eternal, right? An idea that that has a long history in the history of religion broadly, and Judaism in particular, and is retained today, I think, in certainly in the folk imagination and in the liturgy, the idea of an eternal soul that endures. Beyond the physical body, because for the Kabbalists, as for other believers in reincarnation, that soul of many different parts stops at takes many different stops along the way, along the great arc of human time, in different physical incarnations, different physical bodies, particularly to do different mitzvot, which can only be done in an embodied state, for the sake of both the tikkun, the repair of the soul, and the larger tikkun of divinity and of the cosmos. So the idea of tikkun and tikkun olam, right, which has come to mean something a little bit different in modern social justice language, really does derive, in at least in certain important respects, from the centrality of the term tikkun, and the notion that the human being is charged with the kind of repair of various broken elements of divinity. But I want us to zero in on what I think is the core conception of the Kabbalists of this period, and regarding the nature of the essence of self, as to say, if the human being, if that the human being, ultimately the self, really is the soul, is the inward part of what we understand to be the person, and the body is but a cloak that is finite and that passes away. Of course, that's hardly our own experience of the matter, right? We experience the world very much as embodied human beings, and I think that the larger question of where embodiment plays into Kabbalah itself is also quite significant and important. But I think at root, the Kabbalists believed that the essence of the self was the soul, and that the soul, as we're going to see, is essentially an offshoot of, born of, the very substance, if you will, metaphysical substance of divinity. That is to say, that's precisely the reason why the soul is eternal, is because it is born of eternal divinity. And where the line is between divinity and humanity itself, you could certainly raise that question. And even in one of the texts that we're going to look at, it says, and that's why human beings are called B'nai Elohim, right? The sons of God, right? Which might sound Christological at first blush, but really is a reflection of the idea that for the Kabbalists, ultimately everything is one, and that oneness is God. Right? Everything is God, and everything is the oneness of God, all interconnected. It just manifests in all different kinds of different ways. And this is something that we see in a number of different religious traditions, as well. So this is another way to understand what we're going to see shortly. But first, one of my favorite, very direct statements about this, and this is in the first page of the this is in the first page of the PDF packet, drawn from in this case, drawn from Vital's Shar HaGilgulim, the Gate of Reincarnations. It also appears in in Sha'arei Kedusha. And this is in my translation, and this particular text I published, or this portions of this text I published also in an article in the Journal of Religious Ethics a number of years ago, and which we'll be able to send you the reference of it if it's not already in the chat for you. An essay called "A Chariot for the Shekhinah." It says, indeed, know that the person himself, or the person themselves, ha'adam atzmo, is the spirituality that is within the body. Hu haruchaniyut asher betoch haguf. And the body is the garment of the person. Haguf hu levush ha'adam, and it is not the person himself or themselves. Ve'einenu ha'adam atzmo. Haguf einenu ha'adam atzmo. And it says that also further. I'll just also read the other section, which is from Sha'arei Kedusha, which is very similar, a little bit further down on that page. It's again in my translation. It is known to masters of knowledge that the body of a person is not the person himself, the person themselves. Guf ha'adam einenu ha'adam atzmo. Guf ha'adam einenu ha'adam atzmo. The body of the person is not really the person. Really very bold statement. And is the foundation, I think, for the larger doctrine. It follows from this that a person is the interiority or the inwardness. Ha'adam hu ha'pnimiyut. Ha'adam hu ha'pnimiyut. Person is the interiority, is the inwardness, while the body is but one garment that the intellective soul is garbed within. The intellective soul, Nefesh HaSichlit, is a term that's really borrowed from Jewish philosophers who were paraphrasing Plato and Aristotle about the rational soul versus the appetitive soul. But really, what's meant here has more to do with just the exalted nature of the soul that is garbed within the body, and she, the intellective soul, having to do the nefesh hasichlit, is the person themselves. Nefesh hasichlit asher hi ha'adam atzmo, blending together various elements of gender characterization in Hebrew here, right? That the soul is the essence of the person, is the person themselves, and that they are garbed in a physical self while they are in this world, while he is in this world, and after death, this garment will be stripped away from him, and he will be garbed in a pure, clean, spiritual garment, which is also a reference to the Chalukah D'Rabbanan, the kind of the garment of light that a person, according to the tradition, is garbed in. Their soul is garbed in to protect them in all of their fragility from after the body has died. So while the person is in this world, the nefesh will be garbed in the body, and after the death of this body, this garment will be stripped away from the person, because the person is the soul, and that person, i.e., that soul, will then be garbed in a pure, clean, spiritual, metaphysical garment. Right. So the core fundamental statement by Vital, both in the first passage from the beginning of Shar HaGilgulim, the gate of reincarnations, and here in Shari Kedusha, the gates of gates of holiness, is specifically creating a kind of very, very, very strong assertive polarity or juxtaposition between the soul, the interior soul, the inwardness that defines the nature of the self and the person, and the finite body that holds it for a time. That's of course not necessarily much comfort, given that we know one another, often very know those who we love, and those whom we care about, and those whom we know, and ourselves through our embodied selves. But it also aligns in a fundamental way with the concept that so and so's soul is bound up in the bond of life, or so and so's soul has their neshama has an aliyah, as it is said traditionally. May their soul have an ascension, or that perhaps more colloquially, so and so's soul is looking down upon this moment, right? So there is a kind of strong, I think, there is a very strong essential belief in this sense of an enduring eternal soul that transcends the finitude of the physical body. But just to underscore, nevertheless, the soul still has to descend into these physical bodies, and it's generally not seen in quite as negative a way as you find in let's say in Plato's Phaedrus, where the soul is pleading not to be sent down into the prison of the body, and all of the filth and muck, as it says in that context of physicality, and wants to stay in the heavenly realm above. That's not to say that these sources don't have a somewhat negative view of physicality, but physicality is understood to also be this instrumental and this key doorway into the spiritual essence that is our inwardness, that is our soul, that endures beyond this physical lifetime, and that must travel, according to this Kabbalistic doctrine, through many, many different physical bodies in order to repair the different parts of its soul that are all part of this grand ancestry of soul, which all goes back to Adam HaRishon, to first Adam in Eden. And according to the Lurianic mythology, at first, right, even after the dramatic creation mythology of the light of infinity, the light of Ein Sof, filling these vessels, these kelim, and then them shattering and sending down the shards of those containers with their sparks of light into the future, into the realms of the mundane below. There also was a shattering of the first human self, which, according to the Lurianic mythology of Adam HaRishon, first Adam, was a gargantuan androgynous body of light. A gargantuan androgynous body of light, right? Bigger than we could imagine. And when Adam sinned, and this is part of actually a use of a strong original sin mythology in Lurianic Kabbalah, lest you thought there weren't even more correlations to things you thought were specific only to Christianity. And part of this also may be related to some elements in which the legacy of converso identity had upon Lurianic Kabbalah, as Shaul Magid has argued in his book From Metaphysics to Midrash. So that's certainly important to keep in the back of our minds. But in terms of the archaeology of the soul, if you will, and the soul as eternal light, which ultimately originates in the monistic totality, the complete oneness of the Or Ein Sof, the light of infinity that began it all and that really is the all, right? Even when it made space, even when it did a tzimtzum, a withdrawal to make an empty space for the creation of the world. So when Adam sinned, that gargantuan body of light shattered like shattered glass and fragmented sparks and pieces of light down into the darkness of the mundane below, if you will. And each of those fragments of light of the original body of Adam became the soul roots for each tree formation or each all the branches and branches of branches, right? Uncountable in number, roots and branches for all of the soul families, if you will, that result in that reincarnation process. And so the process of reincarnation of souls is actually, when we come back to it, can actually ultimately all be absorbed back into the original body of Adam, right? Which has actually a very fascinating, I think, ethical, spiritual import, right? That's to say that all of our souls, with all of their different fragments of light, different parts of soul, higher and lower, which are all different elements of greater and lesser refinement of that light, are all part of that one humanity, are all part of that one original human, which also, as a body of light, was all part of the original light of God, right? So basically, it's all part of a one original Adam, who is also part of a one original unified oneness of God. So our eternal souls are part, even as they have different component parts, they are part of this one body of Adam, one body of the human, which is actually really all part of the one body of light that is divinity. We are all part of God, right? All of the abstrusities and complexities and intricacies of Lurianic Kabbalah, which drive people a little bit crazy, are actually, you could say, and I think Tzvi Ish Shalom made this argument very interestingly in an important book called Sleep, Death, and Rebirth on Lurianic mystical practices, that ultimately Lurianic Kabbalistic theology is monistic. That is to say, it is all one. And we see this also in we see this statement also return to the next page, which first comes from in the first part from Shari Kedusha, where it says the essence of a person is that they include all of the worlds. Mahut ha'adam hu kalul kol olamot kulan. Right? We include it all. We include all of these elements of reality. And I'm gonna work through a few more of these passages, and then we'll have some time for some discussion. I think was also the method that was suggested to me. So just to kind of get a sense of our arc. Mahut ha'adam hu kalul kol ha'olamot kulan, in their generality, in their particularity, and in all ways, the essence of a person is that they include all the world. We have all of the worlds, meaning all of the dimensions of reality, of the cosmos, of divinity itself, inside of us, inside of our souls. We are all part of it, right? And then let's go down to this next text, which I think is just fantastic. And this, by the way, this is this piece, and I think it's also in the chat, if I'm not mistaken. But this part, which is from the still in word processing, is coming out in a book on reincarnation, in Kabbalah more broadly, and this is from an essay of mine. This is also my translation. All of these, and this is referring to the relationship between these energies of the Sfirot, that is to say, parts of divinity that flow through the transcendent realms of divinity and then ultimately into the human being. All these become a chariot for the light that is drawn forth from the lights of the 10 Sfirot that are within the world of Asiyah, which is one of the stages of becoming. We're not going to fully get into the four worlds at this exact moment, but basically the idea that from the 10 Sfirot, which are the 10 dimensions of God, they flow downwards, and they become, and they're contained within the four foundational elements in order to give them life, and they are within everything. They are within everything. So God is within everything. And so too is it the way of, in terms of what is contained within the person, right? We too, just as God in the as the 10 sphere of the 10 emanations, the 10 rivers of divine energy, which are all one, the 10 that are one, the Kabbalists would never tire of reminding us. These fill all of the world and all of the universe in all of its seeming fragmentation and separation. It's all one interconnected reality, which has, I think, very interesting correlations to contemporary understandings of the universe, with and of matter and so forth. And in my לפי מיעוט השכל שבי, לפי מיעוט שכלי, right, in terms of my limited understanding of it. The light of the quarry of souls is inward and higher than the light of the quarry of angels. So there's a light of human souls that's even higher than that of the angels, and for it is through that light of the quarry of souls that their light and life force is drawn forth from the 10 Sfirot into them. And the greatness of the soul is further clarified insofar as there's a light that is born and drawn from the light of the 10 Sfirot themselves. This is very striking. Or mityaled, and this is the language of birth. Mityaled v'nimshach, and is drawn forth me'or ha'eser Sfirot atzman, from the light of the 10 Sfirot themselves. So human souls are quite literally, or in their terminology, spiritually born, metaphysically, of divinity. So therefore they are like the flesh of the baby that is born of the human parent, so too the soul is born of the spiritual flesh, if you will, of divinity, and not through an intermediary, right? Directly. For this reason, they are called children of the Lord your God. Banimatem ladonai Elohechem. They are called literally children of God. And he means this, it seems, almost hyper literally, right? That the souls are literally the eternal spiritual offspring of the very stuff of divinity, and that's why they're eternal. And so then we ourselves, if our souls are, so if our souls are the essence of our humanness, and if the soul is essentially inseparable from divinity, then we are part of God, right? We are but manifestations of God. And this is the secret, right? And they are like a son, or right, they are a son, or like a child who grasps hold of his father and is drawn forth from him. Or I think more powerfully and viscerally, like the baby that is born of the mother, right? Born of the flesh of the parents, right? And what does that mean? And this is the secret of the fathers of the chariot, which is this very enigmatic statement found in Breshit Rabbah, an old ancient rabbinic midrash. It says that the fathers, meaning the patriarchs, are the chariot, and the chariot has to do with a certain element of ancient Jewish mysticism, but really it's referring to the upper metaphysical dimensions of divinity. So it means that the human, right, that there's a kind of hen, they are, right? So there is kind of a direct connection and separability, almost identity between, right, as in the sense of equivalence, or at least in terms of how it flows forth between that upper dimension of divinity and the dimensions below. Right? This is the secret of you who cleave or connect to God. Tem hadvekim b'Hashem, right? Which might be familiar to you. Tem hadvekim b'Adonai Elechem chayim kulchem hayom. It's found in the Torah service liturgically. Tem hadvekim b'Adonai. A complete conjoining of the light of the 10 sefirot, that is to say, the light of these dimensions of God. And this is not the case with all other creatures. It's an interesting statement, because I do find elsewhere the notion that actually God is in everything, right? So what is he really talking about? He seems to be saying that there's some different way in which the human being manifests. So maybe that's a good place for us to pause, so we can have some discussion, and we'll I think probably next time it'll be good to come back to the rest of the texts in this particular packet also, so we can look at how we are all rooted in Torah too. It's very gewalt. It's very amazing, I think. All right, so I don't know the protocol, Rav Shmuley. Should I just call on folks? I see that that Beth, if I may call you Beth, had your hand raised first.
Yeah, sure. You can feel free to call on people, and I can also help you moderate the Q&A and keep an eye on the chat, things like that.
Wonderful. That's great. I would love for you to do that, Alex.
Okay, great. Hi, Beth. We can start with you.
Hi. I have two questions. So from what you presented here, it looks as though Vital believes that all of our souls are derived from some original gargantuan soul that belonged to Adam HaRishon, and that Adam's sin led to the fracturing and scattering in the creation of all of our other souls. And I guess my question is, if Adam HaRishon was some macro entity of light of some kind, how did Adam HaRishon go about sinning? I mean, we know from what we're told in Breshit, we know the story of Gan Eden and the eating and all that. But it seems like he's positing something that both intersects with that story, with a physical man committing a sin, but then he's also got this light individual. And then my corollary question to that, if the idea of reincarnation is to go back and keep repairing all these defects that resulted from Adam HaRishon, is the ultimate goal then to, in effect, reassemble Adam HaRishon? Those are my questions.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for those questions. So first, the attempt to kind of reimagine the Edenic sin, if you will, right, or the original sin of Adam and Eden, is placed within this kind of different mythology of what was it to be in the Garden of Eden, in this prior to the very notion of death, right? Because the destiny of finitude emerges after Eden, even in the older sources, right? And so somehow this Edenic human figure that was still not human in the way that we know it, sinned in that primordial moment, and in that shattering of the gargantuan body of light, it's Adam HaRishon shrinks down to first to like still very tall, or still giant like figure, and then to a normal human size, right? It's sort of like it's almost like the genesis, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, of the human being, and the other piece of this is that so it's both the original Chet Adam HaRishon, the original sin of first Adam, but it also then evolves throughout the history of humanity, where there's a kind of constant ebb and flow of breaking and repairing, or of sinning and mitzvah and so forth, like in that way, right? So in other words, oftentimes what would happen, at least according to the reports of the disciples, is the disciples of Luria, of Isaac Luria the Ari, would come before him, and he was like a clairvoyant physician of the soul. Right, that's the title actually of my colleague Lawrence Fine's book, which is a wonderful book in English about Lurianic Kabbalah and different elements, and I strongly recommend it. It's quite comprehensible. And they would come before him, and he would be able to see the shapes of illuminated letters on their forehead and read their palmistry and so forth, and all kinds of other clairvoyant techniques, and he'd be able to say, okay, well, your soul ancestor about 30 generations ago did this particular sin, so you need to do the following mitzvot in order to achieve a kind of partial repair of the soul, right? So there was a kind of whole community of soul healing, psychic healing, if you will, around Luria and around other clairvoyants as well. But yes, it would be the case, right, that the repair of the individual soul is ultimately aimed at a final restorative redemption and reintegration of the whole thing, and that would be the ultimate redemption of everything. But we're still waiting, I guess.
Thank you. Barbara, I thought I might have seen your hand go up. Is that right?
You did, and then I began to second guess myself, but I'm going to trust if the timing is wrong, I'll be told so. I just wonder if there's any application to what we're seeing in Israel. Is there any way to talk this way, just the way we were introduced today, to what's going on in Israel?
so I think that would be we could do an extensive reflection on that. I'm sure, and I imagine Rav Shmuley also would have some thoughts on this too. But I'll just say a few things off the top of my head at the very least, right? That the process of soul repair is itself a process of teshuvah, a process of ethical repair, as much as it is the performance of ritual mitzvot. And so all of the work that we can do as individuals, as a community, as fellow human beings, to lift up the sparks, to restore elements of the larger tikkun of the world through our repair of our actions and the work that we can do on ourselves, then hopefully that would contribute in some small way to the larger tikkun that is so deeply needed in the world right now. Of course, there's much more to say, but I'll just say that.
Thank you.
Hi, David.
I wonder, Eitan, if you have heard of a brief interpretation of the contraction of God and the, and then Luria with the, the breaking of the vessels, and then this idea of that our true soul is inward and we are just actually garments covering the soul you talked about. I have, I guess, come up with an interpretation that is slightly different. It's almost consistent, but I'd like to just take a minute or two and talk about it and ask you if you think it resonates, or ask any others on this if you think this interpretation resonates. And I get this interpretation from two sources. The first is Gershom Sholom's book, Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. And in that book, on pages 214 and 215, he talks about that if the universe can be looked at as a tree, the Ein Sof is the sap of the tree. In other words, the Ein Sof is the essence, and then it manifests itself into all the differences in the world, the leaves and the branches and everything. In fact, it kind of transmutes, the light transmutes. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, my second source that drove me to this, a little bit of a different interpretation, which I'm going to summarize in the end, is from Adin Steinsaltz's 13-Petaled Rose. Okay, and on page 37 of that, he says, and I'm just going to read a paragraph: creation is an emanation from the divine light. Its secret is not the coming into existence of something new, but the transmutation of the divine reality into something defined and limited, into a world. Well, right there, you've got the sap transmuting itself into the material world. This transmutation involves a process or a mystery of contraction. Okay? Now, my view of this is that it's that you could say, yes, the Ein Sof is contracting because the leaf, the branch, the flower, the fruit are subsets, they're aspects of God, of the Ein Sof, of the sap. They're not the full thing, but each thing, its essence, each manifestation is the sap. And then he says, God hides himself, putting aside his essential infiniteness and withholding his endless light to the extent necessary in order that the world may exist. So God withholds God's infinite light so a leaf can exist. The sap, the Ein Sof, transmutes itself, and a subset of God's greatness becomes a leaf and this and that and the other thing. And so this so the whole thing with the breaking shards and everything, I never did understand that, and I still don't really relate to that. But through these analogies and this discussion, it's the transmutation of the essence of everything that creates the world. The transmutation and the contraction, in other words, holding back some of the infiniteness of God so that we all have different subsets of that infiniteness. Well, of course, a subset of infinity is still infinity, but you can still use the word contraction. Okay.
I think those are wonderful articulations, wonderful source, wonderful thought. Thank you. I think it's definitely true in terms of as a characterization of Kabbalah, and I'm sure Sholem and Steinsaltz would be relieved that I agree with them. But the idea, I think, is absolutely true that that for the Kabbalists, for the mystics, the Ein Sof characterized, or the infinity characterized, or the endlessness characterized as the light of infinity, flows through everything. One metaphor being that of the tree with its that's in Sefer HaBahir, which is one of the earliest of the medieval Kabbalistic works. We see the image of the inverted tree with its roots in the highest transcendent heavens, and it flows downwards into our world. And further, I would also say that even when we talk about Tzimtzum, or the withdrawal of the light of Ein Sof, to leave what the Lurianic Kabbalists call a halal panui, an empty space, it's not ever really an empty space, because they say that it's still a reshimu, or a kind of trace or film of the infinite holiness. Like the oil that clings to the inside of the pot, right? Or like the oil that's inside of the bottle before after one is done with it, or and so forth, right? That it still contains that divine presence. It contains that divine presence. And that it fills it as its essence, right? So I think it's less about. I mean, it certainly is a contraction, let's say, or withdrawal of the complete totality of everything, in order to allow for manifestation to occur, but that still those elements are filled with that life essence, that sap, that blood flowing through the veins, the breath flowing through the body, the water flowing through, et cetera, that these are different ways of talking about the nourishing essential energy of divine infinity throughout all of reality, as we perceive it in our limited finitude. Pleasure. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. So unfortunately, that is pretty much all the time that we have for today, but luckily we will be able to all get together again at the same time next week and continue the conversation. Thank you so much, Professor Fishbane, for your presentation. Take care.
Wonderful. Pleasure studying with all of you. Look forward to next time.